note, I'm from the Cleveland area, and this summer Gregg came to the Cleveland area. And he had to listen to me gripe in the car when I was taking him to his event, because he did this interview on a prominent radio station in Cleveland, and I'm going on and on about, I cannot believe they got the name of the book wrong, they said the wrong book that just came out, and he said, Jen, that's kind of the way it goes. So my promise to Gregg is that I'll do at least a little bit better than the radio station in Cleveland did. How many of you follow Gregg at all on any kind of social media? Anybody? A few people out there. So we need to start off with the most important question, and that is, how is Cairo fitting into the Hurwitz household?
I'm obsessed with Rhodesian Ridgebacks. So I have a 110-pound big boy, and the deal I made with my wife was, we have a daughter. When she was pregnant with our second child, I said, if we're having another girl, then we're getting a giant male dog, like just to offset the extra, like a big male dog with just dog balls that stick out. Just like we need just like testosterone in the house. So I got this giant dog, and he just turned 5, and then we found out he had a nephew, was born in a litter in Florida. And he came in during the LAX lockdown, was stuck on the tarmac. We were waiting for him, and he's a total love. We named him Cairo because Rhodesian Ridgebacks are African lion hunters, and so we picked a city in Africa. And also, it's the name of the dog that parachuted in with SEALs Team 6 to kill Bin Laden. And so we thought that was cool. And so we have him home, and so now my writing is with him sitting in my lap. And I picture side by side of me with Simba, my oldest, when he was a puppy. I used to type with him across my arms, and now I have this new pup laying across me. And the two of them are fighting very gently in Ridgeback fashion, so he is divine. He's my muse.
I remember a time that you posted about Simba keeping your feet warm. So you can have now one to keep your lap warm and one to keep your feet warm.
Yeah, we have 200 pounds of dog in my office now. It's going to be crazy.
Okay, Gregg, you grew up surrounded by the world of science. You have a lot of doctors in your family. So what took you in the direction of writing and the arts?
Mostly the dinner. See, I'm from a family of internists. My dad's a gastroenterologist. My sister's a pediatric gastroenterologist. So our dinner conversation when friends would come over for dinner was just fucking brutal. I mean, we'd be eating, and my dad would get paged, and he'd get on the phone and say, yes, and was there blood in the stool? And then my friends would just blanch. I had a weird thing that I always wanted to write. There's no one in my family who does anything in the creative arts. And it's weird because I found for a lot of writers that it's the writers who tend to persist in it, it's a compulsion. You're sort of compelled to write, and it's all that I ever wanted to do growing up. I mean, I wrote little mysteries that I illustrated with crayons. Willie, Julie, in the case of the buried treasure. You might be familiar with some of my and no one ever said anything in those. Everyone always like exclaimed and retorted. It had all those like very active Hardy Boy verbs. And so I just wanted to write stories. And I got to college and I studied English and psychology because I thought that would be the best combination of things. I never took writing classes or anything like that. And I just started my first book before I knew better. And I just figured I was too dumb to know that it was hard. And I'm grateful for my lowered IQ in those arenas because I just thought if I write a book and it's decent, someone will publish it because people publish books. And I just got enormously lucky early and never had to have a real job. So.
And then you went on to study Shakespeare as a graduate student. So what made you decide on that? When you knew you were writing, why not choose a writing program?
Well, it's weird. Writing programs are enormously useful to a lot of people. I've never taken one or read a writing book or anything. I mean, I wasn't allowed to watch TV growing up unless there was a Red Sox game on TV, because my dad's from Boston, and if there was a Hitchcock movie on, and that alone explains about 90% of my personality. And so when I went to school, I was sort of a belief that if you're going to be a writer, the best training is to read 5,000 novels. I mean, if you read books and love books, that's your best education, not somebody telling you what the mid-second act reversal is. And I mean, everyone can chart that out, but to really understand the guts of how, of how narrative functions, you've got to read it. In terms of my studies, have any of you seen that great speech that Steve Jobs gave, that's his commencement speech at Stanford? It's really wonderful. He talks about how he just followed anything that was of interest to him, and it made no sense going along. So he took a class on like antique fonts, and he says later on, years later, you know, Mac never would have had a Courier font if he hadn't walked into that class because he was sick of taking like his English class. And so I'm of a big belief that you don't study things for an end goal in mind, especially intellectually. You study stuff that just interests you. So I went off, I was obsessed with Freud, I was obsessed with Jung, and I loved Shakespeare. And so I was studying the things of the most interest. And in hindsight, looking back at it, it makes perfect sense. Like Freud's case studies are perfect short stories, right? I mean, they have the entire structure of a narrative short story. Carl Jung wrote about nothing but narrative. For those of you less familiar with him, Joseph Campbell and his hero stuff is basically just like boiled down Jung, and he's like Cliff Notes Jung, you know. So those, they only dealt with stories and the hidden meaning of stories and the psychological subtext of stories. And then for Shakespearean tragedies, everybody always says, well, why? The most common question I get asked beyond where do you get your ideas, to which I usually reply, where do you get your ideas? Because I have no idea where I get my ideas, is why did a thriller writer, why did a Shakespeare scholar write thrillers? So first of all, I'm not a Shakespeare scholar, I'm a Shakespeare dilettante, but Shakespearean tragedies, if you think about it, nothing makes more sense than writing thrillers. They were highly convention-bound, they were highly structured, they dealt with murder, lust, mayhem, affairs, and they were designed to put asses in chairs to sell at the Globe Theater. They were vastly commercial. And if you cut the Globe Theater in half, you see a perfect cross-section of Elizabethan society, from the royalty up top to the groundlings below. And so the tone has to vacillate between sophistication, there will be a joke about Ovid's metamorphosis for the royalty, and then there will be a dick joke for the groundlings. And so if you look at Shakespearean tragedy, what it is narrative-driven, highly convention-bound tales that run a range of sophistication designed for mass popular consumption. So that's what a thriller is, with lots of social commentary. So that's my answer.
All right. Gregg's published 13 novels now. He talked about publishing the first one early. That was about age 12, right? And you have said yourself that you've gone from writing heroes and villains to writing more antagonists and protagonists. Was that a conscious choice, or did it just kind of evolve?
So this is leaving aside comics, obviously, because I love writing villains in comics. In the books, one of the things that I realized, like early on my first book's a serial killer book. And it's kind of a meta serial killer book, because he's also seen Silence of the Lambs. Like, I don't believe in writing characters that exist outside the world we live in. We have a very educated readership. So all of you have heard of Silence of the Lambs. So for me to write a book where none of the characters act like they've seen or heard of it seems kind of ridiculous, and that they've gleaned no knowledge from it. That aside, one of the things that's a little dull when writing psychopaths is it's like, well, what's the motive? He's crazy. Okay, that doesn't carry with it a ton of dramatic weight. And so what's a lot more interesting than sort of crazy people or straw men for me in my writing is to write antagonists with strongly worded points of view that we can actually relate to, that speak to some of our darker demons. And my favorite thing is when somebody makes it's a series of moral choices made for the wrong reasons. They get someone slowly more and more off track. And so I don't have villains. I don't have characters who are evil. I have characters who are doing things to protect people that they love with a valid point of view. As has often been said, the bad guy doesn't know he's a bad guy. I don't like guys who, when their underling comes to report a misstep, fire them in the face just to show how evil they are. And then when it comes to the protagonists, I mean, that's a little bit from maybe some of what I learned reading Shakespeare, which is the tragic flaw has to be buried in your protagonist. I mean, they have to take some small moral misstep that then opens the door to unforeseen consequences. And it doesn't mean that they deserve it, and it doesn't mean that the consequences are of equal weighting, but there has to be some slight moral or ethical misstep that opens up the plot. If you don't have that, it actually doesn't constitute narrative. It constitutes bad things happening to good people. And that shit happens in real life. That's like, he was really nice, then he got cancer and died. Okay, it's not causal. We have enough of that in the world. And so what defines narrative, what defines drama, is the fact that the character's actions actually have an influence on the world, and then the world plays back on them. And crime fiction in that regard is very similar to tragedy. It's often been called blue-collar tragedy. Noir has been referred to that. But instead of falling from the heavens, as in Milton, or from, thrones, you're falling from the curb into the gutter, as Dennis Lane has said. And so that piece of morality on the part of the antagonist, on the part of the protagonist, matched by a valid point in the antagonist, to me constitutes what drama is.
You've talked about your writing as a way to continue education and learning, and you alluded earlier to learning things that you're interested in. And you've taken this to quite an extreme with your research. And you've done some rather interesting research experiences. You want to talk a little bit about those?
Interesting is a very nice adjective. Most people refer to it as stupid. I've done some stupid shit in the name of research, is the shorthand. I've gone undercover into mind control cults. I wrote a book about cults, and so I submitted to cult testing. I've snuck onto demolition ranges with Navy SEALs to blow up cars. I've gone up and stunt airplanes. I just got back from a couple weeks in the jungles of Oaxaca and Mexico, in some regions that you're not supposed to go to. And my guiding philosophy is this. A, it's fun. That's the first reason to do anything. And B, I feel like my job as a writer is to give my readers a front row seat to an action, to give them a front row seat to a scene. And if I don't go do it myself, I won't pick up the unique telling details that make something real, that give it a ring of verisimilitude. And instead what I'll do is I will regurgitate all the tropes from every single thing that I've seen on TV and in movies that you've all seen also, and we will have that same familiar scene in an interrogation room that we've all seen 9,487 times. To give you an example, well, and the other thing is I don't just do research to fill in the blanks. I don't go somewhere and say, I'm writing this story, I need these 5 facts. A writer's job more than any other, in my estimation, is to be open to opportunity. Opportunity in the plot and opportunity in the world. And I'll give you an example. I was writing a medical thriller, which was my 3rd book, and I needed to interview one guy who was a lab tech at UCLA. And the only window he had was literally while he was parting out a cadaver to send the different body parts to different departments. So I'm there with my little notebook, I'm like 22, and I'm wishing I'd worn galoshes. And he cuts the head off for neurology, he cuts the joints off for the orthopods, he's parting out the body, and I'm asking my little questions and being in earnest. And he finishes with the body, and he walks over, and there's a giant, barn door, almost the size of this opening, and he opens it, and inside are 24 corpses, suspended from their heads by figure-8 scissor clamps, pinching the ears, with their feet about 2 feet off the ground. And he grabs one, drags it over the table on a chain, and lowers it down, and starts doing the same thing. And so I thought, this is like the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I asked what the reason for it was. And the reason is that if you store cadavers flat, the body's distort in a particular fashion that makes them much less useful to anatomy students who are trying to learn how the body functions. Everything kind of settles into the wrong places. And so if they're stored suspended from their heads, it preserves their natural shape, for better or worse. So, of course, I then had a scene in the hospital in this book where someone's running through the hospital, they're being pursued, and they need to hide, and guess where they're going to hide? And if you think about stage setting, and if you think about visuals, what a great scene. But if I hadn't been there willing to brave the spatter from the Sawzall to do the interview, I wouldn't have seen the room. Additionally, that room exists for a reason. This isn't like a fake, cheapy horror movie thing that we just stumbled into and it's Texas Chainsaw. This is a legitimate reason in a legitimate medical institution. And so because it has that reality to it, it's a more valid aspect of the book, and it's different than me just writing stuff that I've seen by watching reruns of ER. And so that's why it's very important to do research.
Have you ever had an idea and gone out and done the research and then said, nope, it's not going to work for a book?
Yes, I went up in a stunt airplane. Now, I don't mind flying, but I don't love it. I'm not one of those guys who would want to be a pilot. But I'm fine with it. And I went up in a stunt plane and was doing barrel rolls over the Pacific Ocean and a lot of stuff. The only one I drew the line at is there's one stunt they do where they go straight up and kill all the engines. And then there's a free fall, and then they restart the engines and go. And I drew the line at that. I was like, I have enough to brag about. Like if I ever get asked in the Muskego library about a stunt plane, I don't have to cop to having done that move. But I finished all this, and then there just wasn't a place for it in the script that I was writing, and I kept trying to make it, because I was like, God, if I went up in a goddamn stunt plane, it's got to get in there somewhere. But at the end of the day, the story is predominant to everything. It's predominant to the author's wishes, it's predominant to whatever research I did, it's predominant to how scared I was when I did it. And so things get cut if the story needs streamlining. And that's a very big, important lesson. It's not the author driving it. The author's job, I think, is to start, you pick your characters, you pick your dilemma, you pick the labyrinth or maze that you're going to drop all your rats into, and then you got to watch them and let them do what they do. And if you've done your job well and created a real scenario and real characters, the choices open to them actually will diminish in certain ways as the plot proceeds. Because you can't just have your character take a left turn any more than your best friend, who you've known for years and years and years, would do something wildly unexpected that's totally out of character. So the writer's influence is predominantly at the beginning of a story, and then it's honoring and being true to these events that they set in motion.
Most fascinating person you've ever met during research?
Wow. I have such a great role. I mean, my Rolodex is like snipers and porn stars, and it's honestly my favorite part of my job, probably aside from the typing, are the people who I get to meet. That's a tough one. One of my good buddies is probably the preeminent demolition breacher in the world. He wrote the breaching license for all the SWAT groups. He's a SEAL Team 6 plank holder before they had SEAL Team 6. He's the guy who the CIA brings in to practice hostage situation. A breacher is someone who goes through a wall, for those of you who aren't as odd as me. So it's explosives to get through things. And he's a grizzled old guy. He's been around since like the early UDT teams, before they had SEALs Team 6, before they had the SEALs even. And so like, you know, if the CIA is practicing airplane takedowns for hostage situations, he's the guy they bring in. And what's amazing about him is, first of all, he doesn't sleep. Second, he can drink, like, without exaggeration, he can drink 58 Guinnesses. Like, there was one time when I had appointments and left him in a bar at noon and got him at the end of the day, and the table was covered. And he's an unbelievable and phenomenal drinker. It's really to be admired. And he doesn't sleep, so he stays at my house a lot, and he'll sleep with his arms crossed on the couch with his feet propped up, still wearing his jungle boots. And if I get up to get a glass of water, his eyes will just open, and he'll follow me across, and he'll follow me back. And I'll go, "Good night, Chuck," and he goes, "Good night," and his eyes close again. He's an amazing dude. And the other thing, and part of it is, it's not just the machismo or the handlebar mustache. He's like so straight, he looks gay, you know? He's like so hardcore straight, he looks like one of the Village people. He's still got like the center part and the feathered hair and the mustache. And I went shooting with him. That early SEALs Team 6, by the way, they had to redesign the gun barrels because they were cracking from the amount of shooting that they were doing. They had to reinforce them. He shoots like in a movie. Like I'm on a target, I was shooting, and I was anticipating recoil, so I was grouping behind right. Let me see if that gun works. With one hand, he'll shoot and put 8 bullets, not on the target, but the little one circle, on the one, halfway down, one circle, all bullets through. So there's the combination of like, you know, impressive drinker, you know, Western level shooter. And the other thing that's amazing is he is an amazing self-taught physicist, because he has to calculate overpressure charges. So if I get down in the morning, he will have butcher paper spread over my kitchen table, and it's covered with equations for like C4 charges and what level to use for what overpressure if there's hostages. And he's sort of this amazing full package. And one of the things that always happens to me is I have friends from very different arenas. So I went to a kind of snotty East Coast college, and I have a lot of friends who are more hoity-toity, but my friends are my friends, so they go with me wherever I go. And so there was this great, like, sort of Hollywood gay birthday party in Malibu, and Chuck was in town. And I was like, you know what? He's coming. Like, that's what we're doing. So he shows up. He's got, like, the true blue jeans, the tight tucked-in shirt, the big American flag, like, gripped by the eagle, you know, he's staring at you. And I brought him, and inevitably, hit of the party, right? So I have all these guys who are like, oh, when I traveled in Russia, in my gap year, I found very unusual binoculars I used for my safari. And so all of a sudden it turns into a whole conversation about optics, And so there's so many areas of overlap. And I think that's my favorite thing, is if you're drawn to people who are genuinely interested, everyone loves that. Do you know what I mean? It's not, there's amazing overlap in ways you wouldn't anticipate, and it adds a lot of richness and texture to one's life.
Chuck sounds like someone from The Survivor.
Chuck would eat everyone from The Survivor. There'd be a pile of bones. He'd walk off the island in jungle boots naked.
Okay, if you're not familiar with Gregg's writing, typically in one of his novels he has some kind of ethical or moral situation, at least one, but most times many, social issues, and a slew of very gray characters, as he was talking about before, that there is no staunch white or black, that they fall into that gray area. And they are also very involved in complex relationships, and that's all these dynamics are going on in the book at the same time. So where does it start, Gregg?
It starts for me when a character meets a moral dilemma. I had a note that I jotted down in my sophomore year of high school in my little writing journal that contains all order of embarrassing stuff. And then I went off and, became ostensibly an adult, went to college, went to grad school, wrote a book, wrote another book. And when it came time for my fourth book, I realized I had the character who matched this high concept plot thing that I'd written when I was a sophomore in high school. And that's the basis for the Kill Clause. One of the things that people think about, in Hollywood, there's the term high concept. Do you guys know what high concept is? High concept's a movie that can be summed up in a sentence or a book. So there's a giant asteroid hurtling toward Earth, and a bunch of deep sea drill guys have to land on it to blow it up before it kills us all. Armageddon. One sentence, you know the movie. The book Meg, it's Jurassic Shark. There you have it. And then, there's brilliant instances of high concept. There's a book called Top 10 that you probably haven't heard about. My agent sold it in 2 sentences. I can't count, so then I'm going to say it, and someone's going to go, that's actually 3 sentences, but bear with me. He sold it for $1 million at a lunch, and the concept was this. There's a guy who's number 7 on the top 10 most wanted list. He's really competitive, and he wants to be number 1. So he's going to kill everyone ahead of him, but number 3 is an undercover FBI agent. That was $1 million. And the book hadn't even been written yet. And then the book came out, the movie wasn't made. I don't know that the book performed all that well. But the point for me is that high concept is actually the easiest part of my job, I think. I think of high concept stuff all the time. The key for me is, when do you meet a character who collides with that in a way that is compelling and then gives rise to a plot that we care about? Or else, we've all had that experience reading a book, or especially in movies, the endless double pump third acts that happen where you just get action fatigue with explosions. If you don't have characters and relationships, all that you're doing is watching plot, and that'll just wear you the fuck out, and no one cares.
And that's why Gregg's consistently on my favorites list year after year.
Because I wear you out.
Might rephrase that.
All right, let's move on. And we'll talk about his new book, which is Tell No Lies. And you've done something a little bit different in this book. And granted, in each book you kind of...
I hope so.
Yeah. You've... I've seen a progression with Gregg's writing as he's gone and on. He's always been a stellar writer, but each book just seems to get better and better and better. And with Tell No Lies, he incorporates a very, very strong sense of place, which has not really been in the previous books. And that sense of place takes place in your hometown, San Francisco. So why for this story? Why is it, did this take such a prominent role this time?
Well, it's funny because people talk about place as character. You guys have heard that phrase, right? And I always think, I've used it a lot, and then I realized at a certain point, I'm like, that doesn't actually mean anything. What does that actually mean? I think I have one other book, which is The Crime Writer, where Los Angeles plays a role in the book and actually plays as a character. And I think place as a character in a book when the book could take place nowhere else. And so I have a lot of books set in LA that I could migrate to Chicago, or I could migrate to New York. The Crime Writer has to take place in LA. They're Watching Too has to take place in LA. This book, Tell No Lies, has to take place in San Francisco. I was born there. I've lived in LA a long time. I prefer Los Angeles for everything, but I kept the Giants, which was a really good idea. And I realized that this book deals with, it hinges on an interplay of class and race in a way that functions wholly uniquely in San Francisco than anywhere else. Los Angeles is a very, very different type of city. And as the story evolved, I had the premise, I had the characters, I realized that 13 books in, that this would finally be the book that would take me home. And to just give a shorthand about what the book is about, it's a guy, Daniel Brasher, he's from one of the founding richest families in the city. And he's kind of walked away from his overbearing mother and his family portfolio, which is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's become a therapist managing group therapy sessions for violent offenders, rapists, murderers, and he's in a set room with them working on them with therapy. And he accidentally gets in his mailbox a letter, which he is mortified when he opens up, that says, "Admit what you've done or you'll bleed for us." And there's a deadline given. And to his great relief, he realizes that it was put accidentally in his mailbox. It wasn't intended for him. But he looks at the deadline that passed 2 days ago, and he Googles it, and in fact, that person was brutally killed right on the deadline with a 10-to-1. And so he now is privy to getting accidental letters from people with threats that he's on the inside of, that he knows the time and place of when these people are going to be murdered. And it's like, what if you alone were privy to life or death threats for other people? And then he slowly comes to realize that maybe someone in this group of violent offenders who he's very intimate and close with has something to do with it. And that's the premise. But it deals with class, it deals with race, it deals with the way that this group functions and where all these people are from. And it deals with him being from a moneyed family that has a handle on class and what class means. And class works differently in San Francisco than in LA. And I realized there's no way, and 13 books in, this is going to be the first book that actually brings me home.
And you kind of see a parallel as he goes through, a parallel of him describing the city compared to the plot as it's going along. It's really a dynamic that's incredible in the book. And one thing that we haven't talked about yet is the fact that you're writing these thrillers, you have this constant plot just moving, and the action is always going on, but you still manage to fit in a lot of incredible detail, and it's just absolutely one of my favorite things about reading Gregg's books. And I wanted to share a small section with you, and then I'm going to ask Gregg about it. He's at dinner, and he's watching. He says, "Behind a padded swinging door, a bustling circus revealed itself. Carts flying to and fro, lobsters balancing in wall tanks, a steam spewing purgatorial kitchen, ejecting waiters balancing overburdened trays." And when I read things like that, usually the plot's going, you're turning pages, and you just have to stop and reread it and say, wow, that's just an incredible image that he's created for me. When you're writing that, do you ever stop and go, damn, that's good, I'm good?
Well, first of all, thank you. That's very sweet. And second of all, I do it all the time. No, when you're writing well, I think it's just such a relief that it's working, but I don't always know what's really working until later, too. If I'm in the story, I'm in the story and I'm going. And so, I don't stop to take a victory lap after I write something good. And it's funny because I've had days that I just think everything's clicking, and when I go back, it requires much heavier editing. And I've had days that I've written stuff, like the opening to Your Next, that opening chapter, I don't think I changed a word of. I had a dream about a kid getting dropped off at a playground, and his dad says he'll be right back, and he's abandoned, and it slowly dawns on him he's been abandoned. I don't think I changed a word of that. I had the dream, I woke up, I wrote it down at 5 in the morning, and it never altered. I've had other stuff where I think it's really clicking, and I go back and read it and go, oh my God, this is 30% too long. And so it's hard to always gauge when you're in it, but there is that pleasure when it's working well. Like, I play soccer, and there are those moments when you're playing that nothing works, of course, and there's those moments you're playing that you know the four cuts and the shot and where it's going to go in the net before it happens. You get that sense. And when you're writing and you're in that zone, there's nothing more lovely to do with your clothes on. I mean, it's like, it's the best feeling in the world, you know? And so that happens, but you don't want to congratulate yourself too much because you don't know if it's going to go away immediately. If you're like, wow, I'm great, and then all of a sudden, you know, bad sentence structure starts creeping in, and then you're doomed.
Okay, I could talk with Gregg about his books for a long time, but he is so active in a variety of different ways in writing. One of the other things that you're doing a lot is work in script writing in Hollywood, and you just had your first script made this year. So you want to talk a little bit about
Well,
that?
I came in off a script. I did the last 24 drafts or something of a movie called Careful What You Wish For that we just shot, and basically it's body heat, but instead of William Hurt, it's the 17-year-old next door neighbor kid who's lured in. So it's sort of a noir film that's adjusted younger. And so I've been doing that, and then I have a TV pilot I'm out with right now that's based on Stephen King's The Dark Half. That's one of my favorite novels, and we have David Goyer is attached to direct it, and we're taking that out. And my Tim Rackley books are, I'm trying to set up with Sean Ryan, who created The Shield, and I did an adaptation of my Tim Rackley books. And those are over at TNT, though a bit in that like development murkiness at this point. And I have a movie that is financed that we're out making offers. It's a dark, really screwed up little indie movie, probably an $8 million movie that I have over with Sidney Kimmel financing, and we're out trying to get our lead actress. We have our director, and so you know these things all take a lot of time and. It's like building houses of cards. You know, sometimes you can get to the top and all of a sudden you're standing on a set, and sometimes you get one card close to the top and the whole thing falls over. So they can't be counted on the same way as books and comics, but they're fun.
When Gregg was in Cleveland, he also got to go and speak to middle school. Mm-hmm. And I want you to share the story about how the kids reacted to your movie at the middle school.
Oh, this is so funny. So my movie has Dermot Mulroney, Paul Sorvino, Isabel Lucas, who's a big Australian star. She's in the new Terrence Malick movie. She's also the blonde who replaced Megan Fox for Transformers 2, I want to say. And Nick Jonas, of Jonas Brothers fame. And so I gave my talk to everyone. I was very mindful of my language because it was a religious school. And I got to the end, and this like group of girls came up. And they said, so you met Nick, you met Nick Jonas, right? And I said, yeah, we shot every day. I was with him every day for you know, God, what did we have? 24 days at the end of it. And they said, and you shook his hand, right? I said, yeah, I shook his hand. Can I shake your hand? Like, wow, that's what I am. I'm like a walking receptacle for passing on Nick Jonas's, you know, like, skin. It was.
He had to protect his phone with his life too.
Oh yeah, because do you have Nick Jonas's phone number in your phone? Do you have Isabel Lucas's? The boys. Do you have Isabel Lucas's phone number? Can I see your phone? Can I see your phone for a second? Yeah, that would be why. She really needs a call from you, Zachary, who goes about 83 pounds soaking wet. Isabel Lucas is going to, like, you know, take a private jet out of Topanga Canyon and come to Cleveland and take Zachary to the Sadie Hawkins dance. That's what's going to happen.
Okay, now you've had roles in writing, developing, and producing in movies and TV. So can you talk a little bit about what is involved in each of those roles?
Well, writing is the typing part. What was the other one?
Develop.
Oh, developing is when you're, like, most of what I do are pilots. Mostly I want to create my own franchises. The only show I came in to produce was a TV show called V, the remake. And I produced that, and I wrote a ton of those episodes. And that's mostly because the showrunner was a buddy of mine. And they just needed a lot of writing, and I could come in and break episodes and take part of the room for him. And you know, it was just an opportunity to step into something and get a lot of writing done. But mostly developing is just when you're writing something new. So for instance, the development of the Stephen King book as a pilot, you call that development, even though it's also writing. Producing in television, and in features, because I've produced there, it has a couple different meanings. In TV, Writers, once you get to a certain level, you're labeled a producer. And that means that you help run the room, you rewrite other writers. Like, let's say that a baby writer writes a script and it needs a lot of work. You would rewrite them and make sure that it's up to the right standards for the show, or that you're overseeing the notes, but you don't take credit because it's still the younger writer's script, initially. And so that falls under the producer. And then, you're involved with casting. I went up to set a lot. The directors in TV rotate through, and so your job is to make sure they understand the continuity of the show. You have to intervene when two male actors are at a standoff during a fight scene, because both is convinced that they would kick the other one's ass. And in features also, there's a lot more about putting something together. So it's figuring out, okay, how do we get to this person? Who's the agent? Who does the letter? What's the negotiation? I have a relationship, with, I'm making this up, Jennifer Aniston's agent. We've overlapped with a lot, so let me talk to them and we'll go in through there. I have a personal relationship here. There's a director who I'm close with. I just put a book with a director because I call the director on the side. Then you involve the agents after. And the agents come in and do their job at that point. So the producing it can be anything from the writing and the global on a TV show, figuring out the whole scope of a season, to rewriting people, to casting, development, overseeing props, overseeing the actual production, to trying to put a piece together.
I just got the 10-minute sign. And so I am going to tell you that Gregg's going to be here all day, so you can corner him and ask him more questions. And I'll give you a chance in a couple minutes, but there's just so much. He writes comics also. There's just so much that he does, and he's always, going a mile a minute, and but he's still so generous with his time, and he would love to talk to you today. But I want to give somebody in the audience today his book and this shirt. So if you were here last night, you saw we did the Liar Liar panel. And so we're going to do that with Gregg. So if there is a volunteer, I'll let him pick. So does anyone want to volunteer to do the Liar Liar and win his shirt?
Wow. Come on, guys. Who doesn't want my face on their stomach? There's a couple tentative hands. People are like...
Oh, okay. I'm going to give you 4 details about Gregg, and you have to pick out which one is the truth. 3 are lies, and 1's the truth. So you have to pick out which one is
We
true.
could just skip it and give my t-shirt to Marcus Saki, too. Oh, he already has it. Which is weird, because under this, I'm wearing a Marcus Saki t-shirt. So it all just is a little bit weird.
Okay, let's try again. Who wants to volunteer? Take your pick, love.
You pick. I can't. I love all these people equally.
Okay. Okay, here are the details. When Gregg was 5, he slept with a thesaurus for a blankie. Number 2, while he was on tour in Russia, he posed for a bourbon advertisement. Number 3, he cannot tie his shoes without making bunny ears. Or he met his wife while at the dog park when their dogs got in a big fight.
One's a lie.
One's a lie. One's the truth.
3 are the lies.
The post for a bourbon advertisement.
Did you pose for a bourbon advertisement? Okay, another guess?
What?
You can keep going. That's not the right one.
Okay, the one that's true.
The one that's true.
Met his wife at the dog park.
Nope.
I sense your odds rising drastically.
Oh, I like to take a chance. I think you, when you slept with a thesaurus at 5.
Did you sleep with a
I
thesaurus?
slept with a dictionary.
He slept with a dictionary. It's a blankie. So the real one
Granddaughter
is...
sleeps with a thesaurus. So.
Okay, so the real one is...
I don't know how to tie my shoes without making bunny ears.
Okay, let's take a few questions.
You're a very busy man. How do you find time? You said you have 2 daughters? to take time for your two daughters?
I'm very busy. How do I find time to take time with the two dogs? I just completely neglect them. One of the things is I don't sleep a lot, which I don't mean just jokingly. I mean, I really try and figure it out. One of the great advantages to working at home is I'm always home. And so the quality time and hits in between everything helps hugely. When they get home from school, I come down, I see them, I can take a break and, for the nighttime routine, we have dinners. I spend a lot of time with them on weekends, and I'm always the coach. So for soccer, for softball, for all those things. So as much as my wife takes point, I get a lot of quality time snuck in the cracks between things. But then there's times like we were shooting this movie, I was gone a month, and there's just not much I can do about that.
Do you work off of an outline?
Do I work off an outline? Less and less, and not really. I used to, and then my outlines got really long and detailed, and then I went back to no outline. I usually start a novel with 35 pages of bullet points, and then I roughly shape them into categories. And I always know the next run of scenes, but I don't have any kind of clear outline. Because I always think it's got to evolve. Sometimes a character will come along that I love, and they'll start to take over the plot, and so I have an outline. I have two big monitors, and this one's the book, and this one is the outline, and they change all the way through. Like if I see something that's a motif, I'll alter it over here. And basically at the end of it, this one is filled, and this one's empty, and I trash it.
I have not read you before, but maybe you want to read you. So do I need to start with the first one you've written, or can I jump in anywhere?
Oh God, don't read the first one. I wrote it when I was 19. It's exceedingly violent, and contains, no one should ever be accountable in public for anything they thought when they were 19. That's just my opinion. I would start with the newer ones. I would start with Tell No Lies, probably, or what are my last ones? The Survivor, You're Next. I would start with one of the newest.
And I often recommend The Crime Writer too, so that's a good place to start as well.
How do you get your research people, you're being friends with Chuck? How do you get them to tell their secrets? How do I get using?
My research people to tell me the secrets? How do I get them first of all, or just how do I get them to talk?
How do you get them to tell you?
I usually with the threat of physical violence.
Or the offer of alcohol.
Yeah, well, see, one of the things, it's a trust thing. If you call a police station and talk to the PIO, to the public information officer, that's not who you want to talk to, because that's someone who's very versed by legal. They have a lot of the answers that they want to give. And so what you want is to really, for me, it's less about the information. I can find information online. When I was interviewing doctors about a particular case, I read everything about the case. What you want to know is how someone thinks. You want to pull on their head and look out through their eye holes. That's the stuff that you want. How do they talk? What's the slang? How does their brain work? A lot of that is just getting time with them. It's drinking with them. It's going to dinner. But the thing I found with people who are in intelligence agencies, cops, military, the arenas that deal and doctors and lawyers, arenas that deal heavily with confidentiality, is you really develop a relationship of trust. So I've had discussions where they'll tell me a whole story and say, that's all off the record. It's a journalistic relationship. Or Chuck will help me build a bomb, and then he'll say, take these two parts out. Pick any two, but you're taking two parts out. Because I don't need to build the anarchist cookbook.
We have time for one more? No? Oh.
What happened to V?
What happened to V? We got picked up for a second season, and then we didn't get picked up for a third season. It was an enormous show internationally. But the national ratings were lower, and ABC was switching over. This is probably more information than you want. It was a Warner show on ABC, and so for ABC carrying the domestic, it doesn't make as much sense for them as an ABC studio, ABC network show. And so our ratings just weren't where they needed to be in the U.S.
How did you research a cult? Did you join?
See, how did I research a cult? Did I join a cult? This is great, because this is always a question I get asked when I'm outside LA. Because in LA, everyone's like, where did you possibly find a cult? It's like, I walked out my door. I live in LA. I was literally typing this book, and one of my friends who's an actress called and said, "Hey, do you want to go to a special group next week?" Well, what's it about? It's about, further individuation. But what is it? It's about taking things to the next level. But what is it? It was like classic. It was like, yes, I'm in. So I went to one of their kind of walk-in seminar things that lasted 8 hours that you can't leave. I did not get in a bus to leave to go to another facility, because once they have you for 3 days, they can start to alter your behavior. Like, they'll put you in a cabin with a broken sprinkler that keeps you up all night, sleep deprivation. They get you up really early, you go to bed late. In the car on the way there, you're filling out forms and talking, you're not paying attention to where you are. It's out of cell phone range, no one knows where you are. They control your food, they start to add sugar to your food. And what happens is we're very social animals. Like, you've all been to the bad Broadway show or equivalent, that you're in the 5th row and it was awful, but everyone stands up, all the tourists, for a standing ovation, and finally you stand up because you don't want to be the one asshole who's like, "I want to express my mild distaste at this version of Oklahoma." And so you stand up. And that's a healthy social impulse. Like, we don't want to be assholes, And so when you go to these group settings, they sit you in a horseshoe and they say, "Who's ready for personal growth?" And the pressure, like, I'm a pretty obstinate human, but the pressure of 400 people in a horseshoe so they can all see you standing and you're the one sitting, that's pretty intense. Like, you can feel that. And so once you're gone at a separate location, they do that, they take your whole world, there's privacy deprivation, and they skew it by 10 degrees so that everything that you do, every healthy interaction that you have is slightly off course, playing off your good influences. And by the end of 3 days, you're in a different world. And so I avoided that part, but I went to the lockdowns and I went to the testing and did other stuff that I could fill you in on more if we weren't out of time.
And I promise that they didn't alter your food here, but if you would please help me thank Gregg for coming today.
Thank you.